I want to begin my sermon this morning with a personal experience that I think I've told before, or at least I've written about it, and so some of you, this may sound familiar, but it fits so well the text from Ecclesiastes that I want to tell it again. Several years ago, I went on a backpacking trip with a youth group from Vandelia. Megan, that was the trip you went on, if you'll remember that. It was when Gabe Gillespie was the youth minister, and he had contracted with a Christian company or ministry in Colorado, and they provided all of the gear, all of the equipment that we needed, and they planned the entire week's activities for us. And one of their cardinal rules was that the kids were to provide the leadership for the group, and we adults who were on the trip could interfere with that only if a decision was made that could be dangerous, harmful, or destructive in any way. Now, one of the week's activities was that we were going to climb one of the 14,000-foot peaks there near the camp. So we trekked up to Timberline at night. We hiked up with our flashlights up to Timberline, and we stayed there for a few hours, tried to sleep, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, we left to make the final ascent. The goal was to be on the summit when the sun came up. As we started out on that last leg of the trip, there was a high, cold, very cold wind that was blowing. And very soon our group was strung out for, I would say, at least a half mile. And some of us who were up front and very close to the summit, I remember this so clearly, Mark Dodson was with us, we sat down to rest and to let the others catch up when word made it up the line that some of the kids just weren't going to be able to finish. They just weren't going to be able to make the climb. They were either exhausted or they were just freezing to death, because we had some kids that just didn't have the right kind of clothing on, and they were as cold as they could be. So the word came up, we're not going to be able to finish the climb. A decision had to be made. Should we go on to the top and then pick up the stragglers on the way back, or should the whole trip be abandoned? The kids who were up front and who were really the decision makers decided that if everyone could not get to the top, nobody from that group should go to the top. It was one of the best decisions I've ever witnessed in my life. And I say that because these kids took the group, they took the community, they took the church into consideration, into account. Imagine what would have happened if some of us had gone on to the summit and then coming back. How would we have made everybody else feel? Inferior? Inadequate? Weak? Inept? And of course, we would have been talking about how wonderful it was and what a great view we had from the top, and none of them would have experienced that. It would have cast a shadow over the rest of the week. Now, undoubtedly, some of you don't agree with that decision. And you're thinking, if I had been in that lead group, I would have gone to the top. I mean, why waste the effort of almost getting there and then quit and turn around and go back? Right? Some of you thinking that way? I understand perfectly. I wanted to go on. I wanted to add that peak to some of the other peaks that I've climbed in Utah and in Colorado and in New Mexico. I wanted to go on. So I understand if you're feeling that way, but I wonder if we don't feel that way because all of our lives we've been immersed in the culture of individualism. And all that most people think about is what's good for me, and what's going to give me the most pleasure, and what will satisfy my ego, and what will advance my cause, and what will make me look good. I want you to be real honest. If you had been up on that mountain on that day, I think some of us would have to admit we would never have given the other kids a thought. Oh, let's go on to the top. And then we'll take care of them when we get down. We'll pick them up and they can go. Some of us would never have thought of the other people who couldn't make it, right? Because we're so immersed, so covered up in that culture of meism and of individualism. And I'm so thankful for those young people who made that right decision all of those years ago, because they taught me a valuable life lesson. The community goes forward, or nobody does. And with that in mind, I want us to read the text from Ecclesiastes, all right? Keaton, let's put it up on the screen. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, from the New International Version. Again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of the oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who have already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who's never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And I saw that all the toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. But better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. As Hale, the writer of Ecclesiastes, considers the evil and wickedness in this world, which he brought up back in chapter 3, verse 16, he now focuses his attention in one specific area. He calls it oppression, and he uses that word several times. Oppression, if you think about a definition, oppression is accumulating and profiting without regard for the needs and the rights and the nature of other people. In the Bible, oppression involves cheating one's neighbor, stealing, retaining property that's not rightfully your own, swearing falsely against somebody, defrauding another person, making unjust gains, profiting from excessive interest. All of those things are part of the biblical definition of oppression. And God forcefully insists that his people not oppress anyone. Let me read you some passages. Leviticus 19:13. God says, do not defraud your neighbor or rob him. Do not hold back the wages of a hired person or a hired man overnight. Deuteronomy 24:14 and 15. Do not take advantage of a hired man who's poor and needy, whether he's a brother Israelite or an alien living in one of your towns. Pay him his wages each day before sunset because he's poor and counting on it. Or how about Zechariah chapter 7, verse 10? Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the alien or the poor. And one final one, Proverbs 14:31. He who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. In God's economy, people are never to be treated as objects out of whom we can squeeze some kind of profit. That's God's word to us. However, in spite of how God wants people to live and to act, oppression continues to exist all over this world. And the oppressed are sometimes so miserable, living without anyone to comfort them, living without any kind of hope that their situation is ever going to change, that death seems preferable to living. And perhaps sometimes they wish they had never been born. Kohelet recognizes that. He talks about that. He recognizes how meaningless it must be and how hopeless it must be for people like that. Now, the fuel that feeds the fires of gain and toil and oppression is now identified for the first time in Ecclesiastes in verse 4. The fuel is envy. Isn't that amazing? It's envy. It's the suspicion, or maybe the realization, that others are getting more out of life than we are, and that leads us to compete in this insane rat race that we're in. It's envy that leads to oppression. Because if you pursue outdoing your neighbor, you are inevitably going to step on the heads of those who may be below you. That's oppression. That kind of trampling is disastrous to the person there, and it's also futile for the upward mobile person. Now, it's true, Kohelet admits, on one hand, that fools fold their hands and ruin themselves, verse 5. I mean, the foolish person won't even embrace honest work and consequently has nothing to eat. And I say that because the word there in Hebrew, ruin themselves, literally means only have themselves to eat. They fold their hands, and all they have left, if they're going to eat anything, it's themselves. So they lead themselves to ruin. That's true. On the other hand, we should not rush to the other extreme and out of envy push ourselves to outdo everybody else at the expense of tranquility and the expense of peace. So, folks, what I think he's saying is that real life, meaningful life, is no more realized through grasping with both hands than folding your hands in laziness. Neither approach to life will work. Now, Kohelet has made it very clear to me that the life of striving to get ahead of everybody else is fundamentally anti-people. It is anti-neighbor. And the point of life, when viewed from that perspective, is to get ahead of one's neighbors instead of participating in community with them. So it's not surprising that in verse 8 he turns to the utter loneliness of that lifestyle. He paints a vivid little picture of a man who has become obsessed with gaining wealth and power. And this person, he says, is all alone. Oh, he may have a wife and kids, let me tell you. The person he describes here may have a wife and kids, but he has no time for them. Convinced he's working for them, his heart is actually devoted and wedded to his projects and to his money and to gaining and to getting ahead. That is such a contemporary portrait, is it not? The higher you climb on the ladder of success, the lonelier it becomes. And in the process of acquiring more power and more money and more stuff, one becomes less and less involved with God and with other people. And that's the description that he gives here. Now, there's an alternative to that lifestyle. The alternative is found in verses 9 through 12. The alternative is living in community. Now, when he says two are better than one, he's not just talking about marriage or just another person. He's talking about community. And it's just so much better. Community leads to a profitable and a rewarding life. And as he describes it here, as we make this journey through life, there are all kinds of pitfalls. There are all kinds of ways to fall down. But help is there. Help is available in community. There are cold, dark nights on this journey through life. But another person or community will bring warmth and will bring comfort. Enemies lie in wait along the way, but with others, we don't fight our battles alone. In community, our lives are strong, our lives are enduring, like a rope with 3 strands, not easily broken. Alone, you're quickly broken. But in community, you're not easily broken. Now, the secular individualism that is so apparent in our modern culture is all about self-sufficiency, all about self-fulfillment, but it has very little to do with the worship of God, has very little to do with the Bible. And even religious individualism has very little to do with the Bible. The Bible is about persons in community. Community with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and community with each other. And I realize I'm kind of treading some thin ice here, but the goal of the Christian is not a, quote, personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not obtaining a personal place in heaven. The goal is to be found, yes, in a right relationship with God and with our neighbors and with the whole world right now. It is to be in relationship now. The future then will take care of itself. Yeah, I don't worry much about the future or what heaven's going to be like, if I have a place there. That doesn't bother me. What I want to do is to live in the moment with God, in relationship with Him and in relationship with you and with other people in the world. That's what this is all about. So as I thought about this passage, I realized several things need to happen in my life. Maybe you will agree it ought to happen in yours, but let me just say this is what I think needs to happen in my life. First of all, I need to root out envy. Peter the apostle said this, 1 Peter 2 verse 1, "Therefore rid yourselves of envy." Now he talks about a lot of other things, but envy is one of the things he says, get rid of it. Rid yourselves of envy. I need to do that. Secondly, I need to deal with my excessive desire for my own advancement, and I need to aim for servanthood instead. On a more positive note, I need to come to a commitment to do as much as I can to contribute to community and to alleviate suffering in the world. And that means I need to do more than just speak empty words or have impotent emotions. And I had some of that last night. Watching TV, I'd never seen this particular ad for UNICEF, and I'm not making any pitch for UNICEF. I don't really know anything about it. But it showed some kids starving to death, and it really touched me. I thought, what if my kids or my grandkids or my great-granddaughter was in that position? And it really touched me emotionally. But I've got to do more than have those emotions. Means I have to look seriously at my own lifestyle and how it contributes to the plight of the poor and the oppressed people in this world. I need to live in community and not just for myself. And I need to realize I have no other duties than to love God and love my neighbors and look after God's world. And I just pray that I might have the heart of those teenagers on that Colorado mountain all of those years ago who thought, first of all, of the good of others and not their own goals and not their own aspirations. They thought of community and they thought of the group. So I want to finish with the words of an old song written sometime between 1890 and 1902 by Charles D. Meggs. It's entitled Others, and someday I'm going to teach you the song because I know the melody to this song, but I just want to read the poem now. Keaton, let's have it up on the screen. Lord, help me live from day to day in such a self-forgetful way that even when I kneel to pray, my prayer shall be for others. Help me in all the work I do to ever be sincere and true, and know that all I do for you must needs be done for others. Let self be crucified and slain and buried deep, and all in vain may effort be to rise again, unless to live for others. And when my work on earth is done, and my new work in heaven begun, may I forget the crown I've won while thinking still of others. And then the chorus goes like this. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let this my motto be. Help me to live for others, that I might live like thee. Let's think about living, not just for ourselves, but living in community. The church, the neighborhood, the city, but there's this whole world that is community as well. And we need to live not just for my own or your own satisfaction and desires, but for the good of the community. I think that's what Kohelet would tell us today.